What's up, everybody? This is Stewardship, and this is the Stewardship video about landlord versus Ahupua'a, lording it up for profit versus stewarding downstream for all, and Blackstone and landlords versus collective land stewardship of the Hawaiian Ahupua'a system. So, so obviously, today we're talking about land. We're talking about how land is managed, how land is, how humans interact with land, how and other beings interact with land with the humans, including the plants and the animals, and of course the water, or what we call vai. In our Hawaiian, I am a native Hawaiian, in case you don't know. In our Olelo Hawaii, which is Hawaiian language, vai is the word for water, which is central to the land management, and it's also vai is also the word for wealth, which tells you something about the relationship which we, as the indigenous people of Hawaii, have had with the land, and the way that we view conceptions of even wealth. There's not really a word that means wealth in the sense, in the Western American European sense, because wealth kind of implies someone, an individual, a business person, a for example, like a CEO of Blackstone, who has a net worth, right? Their worth, their dollar value, right? Their coinage, right? Their monetary value is, or I should say was, because then a recent CEO of Blackstone is no longer around. Their wealth was tallied in multiple billions of what they call dollars. This is strange toilet paper that they hand out to people around the world, and then take actual value, resources from them across the planet. Anyway, but Blackstone, obviously, so there's some current events that are queuing this up. That's why I chose to use the Blackstone HQ, where there were some recent unfortunate events. So thoughts and prayers to all of the executives and extremely wealthy people who had profited from extracting the hana. The Hawaiian word for work is hana. Like pau hana means this. Okay, we're done with work today. Huki pau hana means you're getting off work a little early. But thanks to the hana of many of the maka'ainana of the broken Ahupua'a of the United States, the toil and the labor of many people in the United States has been sucked up into the private equity firms and the portfolios of the unjust chiefs of the United States. Not the president, he is a janitor he is a custodian of the true ruling class, which is the global plutocracy that runs from the United States. But the chiefs of the United States are not pono, right? And they collect vast quantities of the hana, the produce of the land, the work of the people, that tends to the aina, the land, that produces the value. And then not just America's value, the whole planet's value is sucked into these unjust chiefs of the Ahupua'a of America. To describe it from another angle. But anyway, long story short, so thoughts and prayers to the no longer alive people in the Blackstone building. It's I'm trying to keep this video in people's queues. Anyway, and showing up in the we have to make sacrifices to the algorithmic gods of human language. Anyways, so the Yeah. So what are these things I'm talking about instead of just doing my intro comedy routine? So if you don't know, I think most people know what a landlord is. I don't think I need to explain that, right? I feel like sorry. I feel like the concept of a landlord is pretty self-explanatory. You probably have one, right? If you live in the United States, if you live in the collective West, you probably have a landlord. The majority of people are renters. Even if you have a mortgage, if you're paying whatever 4-7% interest rate to your tyrant, to the authoritarian regime of the plutocracy that controls the collective capitalist world, by extension your house, by extension your education, by extension basically everything in your life, your landlord, whether you pay a mortgage or you pay rent, you don't actually own that property. That's one important factor. So even if you have a mortgage, you don't own anything actually. At any second, if you cease remunerating the vai, the wealth produced by your hana, your work, to the unjust Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, whatever mega bank, which is a private hoarding, organized, advanced 21st century collective mass hoarding technology called hedge funds and private equity, various kinds of eldritch terror of capitalist agglomeration, wealth agglomeration, and then methods to mask and evade tax and evade redistributing wealth equally, and properly stewarding the vai, the wealth that they have extracted from the people. Right. That's the purpose of a private equity firm or a hedge fund, and a corrupted, non-existent democracy, right, like the United States or the collective West, is to make sure that if the whole lording continues, despite votes, ballots, protests, sign wavings, lawsuits, fraudulent, controlled, corrupted courts, etc. That's the purpose of Western government and the United States government by extension. So, anyways, but either way, your wealth is going to be low. When you pay your rent or you pay your mortgage, you are giving your labor value up to what your workers produce. Whether you work at a McDonald's, flipping the burgers, that's something that has to be done in order for the people to get their food and for the society to function. Whether you are farming yourself, whether you fix houses, whether you fix electrical lines as an electrical repair person, right? You put your hana, your work, right, tends to the land and the environment around you, and then provides value to all the people. People need electricity. People need to, live their lives. People need the food to eat, to sustain themselves, right? People need, or if you work in a hospital, people need the health care to remain alive, to preserve their health and to preserve their well-being. So whatever you do, you are inevitably giving your vai, your wealth, what your hands have produced, to a landlord, to a capitalist. There's not just landlord, there's various kinds of lords. It's kind of funny because when the Western world changed, quote unquote, changed from feudalism to capitalism, I think I made this point recently, so let me see if I can find that real quick. When the Western world changed from feudalism to capitalism, they didn't even bother to, Blackstone owns 300K homes, which is very Neofeud, let them eat cake moment from pre-guillotine Star-Spangled Versailles. Blackstone is now the largest corporate landlord on earth with over 300,000 homes in the U.S. Billionaires and corporations have bought millions of homes and either raised rents or left them as empty investments. There are 60 million vacant houses, 28 for every homeless person, which is a very Neofeud let them eat cake moment. The aristocracy didn't even bother to take the lord out of landlord when they put the capitalist democracy mask on. This is part of the what is called history. It is a system of mass indoctrination, conditioning, and neuron. It's a method of neuron mystification and wasting. Right? It's neural. It's a neural cul-de-sac called Western education that teaches you that there was progress, but it's actually nothing has actually concretely, empirically, in terms of the de facto relationships between the people, common people, working people, and in Hawaii we call them ali'i class, or the there's various kinds. There's konohiki, there's ali'i, but they're like leadership classes, right? And the government and business, right? So like, for example, a president versus a CEO or a billionaire, right? An executive, right? There was no differentiation in Hawaii between those things. And also there was no concept of private ownership and or capitalist accumulation of capital, money, or property entitlements, etc., under a Western feudal or capitalist framework. So from a non-capitalist indigenous Kanaka Maoli perspective, and also I would say the global majority perspective, historically, maybe not at this moment because of colonialism the last 500 years, but like historically, the way of organizing land and the concept of land, private property ownership, that all of that is alien. A lot of that is non-existent, basically. Even that concept of like, this land is my private property. Like, for example, like Blackstone, these 300,000 plots of quarter acre, half acre, 1 acre lot, right? These 600 apartment units in San Diego, these are mine, right? I, Blackstone, as a corporation, or I, Bill Gates, one of the United States' largest landlords, I own that land. Whatever happens on that land, I decide what happens on that land. I have this paper that is held by the corrupt facilitators of crime, also known as Western governments, that says I am entitled to that land to accumulate wealth based upon the exploitation of the people, whether through rent or the exploitation of their work. If it's a call center for Microsoft, I get the value from their labor, right? But all of that is all completely alien to most of human civilizations for millennia, right? I talked about this in previous videos about how I think which one was it? Let me see if I can find that real quick before I get back to this. What's up, Grant? Just in case people want to read more about this, because I don't know how long I'm going to stream this. But in is it Empire Glass? Possibly it was that one. Yeah, it might have been that one. In Empire Glass, I bring up the video on the East and Persia, which is now called roughly equated to Iran. Iran also had no conceptions of it had some conceptions of exchange of money, but they had extremely tight controls on wealth accumulation. That's why they had, as I pointed out, somewhere in this video, and there's a good video about called the East versus West, the Persian Empire, or the Persian civilization versus the Greek and American and European and Western empires that have always been different. But in the Persian universe, like they had strict controls on wealth hoarding through different methods, not the same as the Ahupua'a method, but they understood that would become a problem if you had a vast accumulation of wealth in a small minority of people, usually men, usually a small group of men, and then a lot of older, richer men, and then a lot of younger men under them that are then trained and groomed for war, right? And also to do mass violence to protect the wealth of the older, wealthier men, right? And so that was known as that could be a very destructive system if small groups usually men started hoarding the resources. So and they would become large, usurious, right, debt masters who had debt slaves, right? So there's a thing called Jubilee. That's one thing that a lot of the East Babylonians, Darius, Xerxes, and various other Eastern Persian leaders and their systems required every 50 years complete total forgiveness of all debt, right? So this would mean the forgiveness of all mortgages. Today, it would be the forgiveness of all student debt, right? All the multiple trillions of it. Forgiveness of all credit card debts, auto debt, student debt, mortgages, right? It would absolutely annihilate the entire collective West, United States, all of G7 and NATO. They would disintegrate tomorrow. They've always been based upon that mass capital accumulation and weaponization of that dragon's hoard of capital in a Greek oligarchy, a Roman Caesarian imperial palace, the feudal elites for centuries and centuries between the Roman and American and the British and French empires. The British and French empires, respectively, all are based upon global planetary scale wealth hoarding on a scale never seen before that. And the United States is just the latest iteration of that system. But anyway, so that's just another a dovetail. Let me see if I can find that. Persia. I could probably, the West versus Persian Empire is another just to as a addendum to or as a reference point to an example of another civilization that's not even in the Pacific, right? That is indigenous to, by the way, Persians are indigenous to Iran, by the way. Happens to be one of the only places that has taken a direct countrywide stand using their actual people and their military in defense of the greatest human rights violation we can all see live streamed on our phones all the time, right? So Persia was another place that understood that mass wealth hoarding, right, into the hands of people like this, right? Handfuls of in Hawaii we would call them corrupted, not pono. Pono is just. It would be a not just elite, right? The Greek leaders, they all had slaves, right? For example, the average Spartan had 7 slaves. They would routinely execute their slaves once a year, just to keep them suppressed and in fear and doing the work, right? Doing the farming, right? Doing the hana, right? Hana is the work of the land, the aina, right? So from get-go, the Western civilization was already corrupted. By the time you had people, the farming, the people that produce food, the people that do all the key vital work that sustains life. Without food, right? Without water, there's no life. But the water helps to produce the food. Without water, you don't have the H2O. You don't have the hydration to bring the nutrients, the necessary water to whether it's taro or kalo, that's our staple in Hawaii, or it's wheat, right, in a lot of Europe, or it's grain, right? On top of course, you have animal husbandry and you have hunting and other things, but the raising of the staple crops, right, has to be done in most civilizations. I mean, there's some human civilizations and arrangements that, it's a little, there's some nomadic and hunter gatherers where that's a little bit different. But most societies of any scale that have some amount of agriculture, and so when you have these large quantities of people that are doing the work of the land, in Hawaii we call it the maka'ainana. In Greek, the Greeks called them slaves. See, in Hawaii, the word means that is that which is the most wretched and oppressed, right? They're Afro-Asiatics. They're basically black and Asian people, ultimately, with Hellenic would equate to white owners, right? That was Greece. That's not even talking about Rome. That's not even talking about Britain or France in the colonial era, or America today in the neo-colonial era, on our global imperial capitalist and also racist system. So from the get-go, you already have a broken relationship, right? We were talking about the Ahupua'a system, from the land to the sea, coming back to the original title of this, video. I'm gonna try not to get too far afield, but the Hawaiian Ahupua'a system, as you can see on the right here, in it, well, I guess I haven't really talked about it. All of the resources, right, are supposed to be distributed, right, according to everybody's need for those resources, all the people, right, and the land is aina. That which aina means that which feeds and sustains in Hawaiian culture, and like the people that work the land, right, are called the maka ainana. The maka is like the eyes or the face, right? It can also be the inlet of the extremely advanced hydroponic permaculture system of terraced waterways that bring nutrients. It can feed huge amounts of people with a tiny amount of land, by bringing water at exactly the right amount with exactly the right angle. You can make sure that the water reaches a large amount of your staple plant like kalo. That was the primary one, or taro is another word for that. And then the nutrients drain to the next platform, and then go down to and with crayfish and other opu and other small fish that are coming back where we Hawaiians have restored Ahupua'a, like in nation of Hawaii on the east side of Oahu. You actually have interaction from the ocean, fish that swim up from the coast, and then help to clean and maintain the pristine water. The water actually stays extremely clear and pure as long as you keep the Ahupua'a system intact and managed properly. And everyone at each level, right, from the mountain to the sea, has to work together and not pollute, overuse the water, right, so that the water continues to go down. So it's collective water management, communal, very, very sophisticated, and very, you have to be very harmonious in your society, because if you have people at the top who want to hoard or want to do what they selfishly, individually, in a Thomas Jeffersonian sense, or in a Greek sense, or in an American capitalist Elon Muskian sense, if you selfishly want to hoard the water, for example, to power malfunctioning, Kenyan enslaving, Memphis poisoning, broken software called AI, right? If you want to take the water, the Vi, for Grok or for ChatGPT, right? Then what happens to the people downstream? Well, now you turn on your faucet in Texas and it comes out as a trickle. Now there's pollution spewing out into your communities. People are getting sick and dying, but you don't care because you're at the top. Because that's a Western capitalist, or it doesn't have to be Western. It's just any corrupt, unjust, not pono civilizational system. Now it's not a guarantee just because you have a good idea like Ahupua'a it's going to work. You could fail to implement it well. At a certain time, you could have a not pono chief who you at any time toxic masculinity and just normal human tendencies to sometimes let the greedy the whatever, they have the story of the two wolves, right? It's because they were all suckled by the Roman wolves' teat in the collective West. No, they're all raised by wolves, like the Ridley Scott movie, TV show. I'm sorry, no. You could, at any time you could have an unjust leader come about. So there's another question: is how, if there is people that seek to hoard, right, to lord it up for profit versus not steward it for all of the community, right, for all of the collective, and also to keep the land not just for the community now, right, it's for the community in perpetuity. This system of Ahupua'a in Hawaii had a pristine ecology for 1 million people in a very small amount of space. 1 million people, by some estimates, were fed, housed, clothed. The medicine was provided, with various kinds of kukuina, some kind of novocaine. There were a whole host of medicinal plants and methods. Like a lot of that came from the alpine. There's actually alpine, even Arctic like climates in Hawaii, and that's a whole other. A lot of Pacific Islands, but in particular Hawaii, have this diversity of ecological strata based upon the elevation where you're at. Like there's actually every single climate on Earth is on this island I'm on right now. It's called Moku'o Keawe. It's also known as the Big Island. Anyway, so So anyway, at any time, you could have somebody fail to uphold the Ahupua'a system, and if that ali'i, the leaders, right, and the men, right, the young men seeking glory, right, or just being brainwashed by the older men, are trained to fight battles. They become warriors, and they are led by a warlord who lusts for power, who lusts for wealth, who just lusts for war. He's a bloodlusting. He just, he's like the Hurt Locker. He just gets off on the adrenaline rush of killing other people. I mean, this can happen. This is real. This is why people watch action movies. People play first person shooters, because this doesn't. People don't stop being people. Just and not to say that everybody just seeks violence and bloodlust, but I mean, it is something that it is a possibility that if uncontrolled, that there are tendencies that can territorialness, tendencies that might help to defend and stop, threats, right, can turn into them threats themselves, right? It's basically the toxic masculine, patriarchal, capitalistic, fascistic, civilizational eventualities. Let's put it that way, right? So if that eventuality happens, oh no, we have a corrupted leader. There has to be a system in place to deal with that. And anyway, I'm bringing a lot of concepts out there, I know, so I'm going to try to back step a little bit, but and let's just go through like the basics of the Ahupua'a system. Maybe I made a little thread about that this week, so I'll just put that up on screen. Sorry about that. Okay. Where did I put it? Okay, here it is. Yeah. So, pre-colonization, we Hawaiians worked 3 to 4 hours per day. All resources, food, medicine, housing were distributed according to need through the Ahupua'a system. Zero hoarding, or something that's called capitalism, was allowed. That's not the only system that can have hoarding. European feudal system was also a hoarding system. The power and wealth was hoarded amongst the feudal lords, kings, marquis, marchioness, duke, duchess, bishop, pope. Ask Voltaire about that. Hoarding was allowed by ali'i leaders, and mass worker exodus as retaliation prevented it. So if people were, so as I said, one of the methods, right? And this is just like an illustration of like the system that by the land divisions. So like the highest, the area closest to the summits of the mountains, or the Mauka, which is the level is like the sky. In that area, there's not that many crops necessarily, but there are some rare plants and flora and fauna that only live at that altitude, and those could also have their own uses, right? So some certain kinds of medicinal plants that are way up there. Mala and gardens, the Vawa forest areas, Kahale dwelling, Hale is a dwelling, Hale Akala, where is a summit of Maui. Hale Akala is the summit of the sun. Kala is the sun. So like it's the house of the sun, because it's the place with the sun. It looks like the sun is coming and leaving that mountain, and there's various other reasons. But anyway, so Kauhale is the dwelling, Kaukula is a plain, Kahavai is a stream, the Loikalo is the taro fields. And so as you can see, like each area has slightly different characteristics. There's a diversity of kinds of labor that's done, right? So if you're a house builder, right? So like the equivalent of Blackstone, right? The Blackstone is supposed to be the steward of the. They're supposed to be the steward of the hale. Okay, but the problem is in Hawaiian cultural analysis, the local steward, right? The local director are supposed to be overseeing the appropriate distribution of housings to people who require dwellings, right? It's not properly, as you can see on the bottom left, right? We have many hundreds of thousands and of people unhoused in the United States, and millions of people actually underhoused, living 22 a one-bedroom apartment sometimes, flopping on couches, living in cars, sleeping in parking lots, living in makeshift, falling apart Walmart tents, dying in the street, being beaten by cops on a regular basis. Hawaii actually has one of the highest rates of homeless people in the so-called United States today, because of landlord, for-profit capitalist systems, including when it comes to housing. So anyway, this is a failure, right? And this is a long-term failure, right? Homelessness is not a new problem. It's been around, or lack of appropriate housing has been around a long time. The Greeks and the Romans also kept their slaves in terrible conditions. The Americans kept Filipino slaves in the Hawaii post-U.S. coup plantations. They lived in 5 by 6 foot boxes sometimes, people sleeping like literally like sardines, like with bugs on the ground, like with no floor. It's just that was not a proper living condition, right? But that's part of the racism, which is that certain people were deemed, which is inherent to the capitalist Western system, which is that going back to the Greeks the whole time, some people were deemed unfit. They're not humans. They were subhuman. They were animals, and animals themselves are deemed lesser than people, right? And so the disrespect of nature, and for Hawaiians that would be like disrespect of your grandmother. Your grandmother gave birth to Kalo, that's your elder brother, right? Your grandmother gave birth to Mano and Shark, and a Honu, and Pua'a, right? You would not disrespect all of the plants and animals and all of creation, right? Because that would be disrespecting your elder brother, right? And so once you can disrespect nature, and then you say plants, trees, land, animals, these are all things that I can own, and even the certain kinds of people, like certain, the skin is too dark, the language is not my language, they look different. Social Darwinism, the so-called Enlightenment of the West, created new ideas for how to stratify and subhumanize people based upon these fraudulent, fraudulent weaponized ideas of evolution, that certain races, right, were greater than others, right? But that's just another one. That's just a 1800s method to perpetuate an already existing unjust system, right, of corrupted. For Hawaiian, the whole system has been corrupt for millennia. Broken, unjust, not pono, no aloha leaders and systems and ideologies that have run the West, the United States, Britain, France, Greece, Rome, et al. The collective West today for millennia. And so, every person for Hawaiian culture, but it's not even a question. It's like, what do you mean? There's homeless people, right? It's like in Hawaiian language, there is no way to construct that sentence really. Like, this is a homeless person because they did not pay, 1/2 of their salary for rent. You can't say that. You just simply, it's not even thinkable. Right? It's unthinkable, right? And therefore it's also undoable. If you think about doing it, something you have already in Hawaiian culture, if you've already thought about becoming a landlord, you have dehumanized yourself. You see, the thought of having people be homeless to benefit you will mean you have already twisted yourself into a broken person already. You would be not pono, right? You were sick. You would be viewed as sick to aspire to profit at the expense of others in traditional Hawaiian culture, and not actually in most human cultures. For most of the time, right? In Native Americans, they called these people the Wendigo, people that sought to accumulate for themselves. Sometimes they would, actually eat human flesh, and that's part of like mythology. But it's more to do with the selfish greed and the pursuit of one's own so-called rational self-interest at the expense of all else. That was a attempt to valorize a broken lifeway, right? That was Thomas Jefferson and these so-called Western philosophers. I recently finished Candide. I highly recommend that to anybody who wants to have a correct description of the Europe and the collective West. Also, Voltaire actually talks about China and also indigenous peoples of North, Central, and South America. And he also talks about slavery. And this has always been reprehensible, even to the French and to the British and to the other Europeans. They just simply have failed to do anything about it for millennia. It's kind of like what you watch when you're watching children be unalived for global imperialist profit, which is ultimately what that's about. It's about maintaining that global system, a planet scale system of landlordship, of private profit and private power, right, and greed maintenance, right? At any time, the world could shift into a different system, but we have to keep unaliving thousands of children, starving them to death, right? And any time, right, the West could stop, but most of the West is, they just don't care, or they feel sad, but they don't have it in, they just don't know how, and the elite are very good at controlling them, and the people become very quiet. That's the problem. If you have an advanced enough for-profit system, they can figure out ways to like these kind of parasitical entities, the landlord, the capitalist, the billionaire. They can warp your government, they can warp your culture, they can warp your mind, they can warp your relationships with other people, right? They insert your relationship with your own thoughts. That's what the malfunctioning, broken, wasteful, absolutely catastrophic torment nexi that is called AI is about. Capitalists inserting themselves between your thoughts, your thinking, your brain, right? Your capacity to form your own coherent sentences, right? And you, right? It's like it's about putting themselves as a middleman between your hemispheres, right? And that's just one of countless other ways. That's just the latest one. They're trying to control everyone's mind, but obviously holding your housing over your head, and then building this seemingly, right, by having people wear suits and having tall buildings, right, and having very formal titles and paperwork, and having a corrupted education system that is based upon mountains of paperwork, right, that is just basically a smokescreen to mask the rampant crime and fraud and evil that is the entire Western world. I mean, from Blackstone to BlackRock to the military-industrial complex, you name it, right? The courts are crime facilitation houses in the West. They're not, right? That's what the Supreme Court does. It stamps 6,000 to 7,000 shadow dockets, including legitimizing torture, legitimizing wars across this earth in private. That's where the justices get the big bucks in private, when they get the private donations and they get all the hands greased, right? So what the ICC is for. ICC court judges are multi-six-figure paid people who give the facsimile, the pretense of justice to the collective West. That's what they're there for, right? It's not about justice. They haven't not successfully stopped any significant global injustice. They didn't stop the Iraq War, the Vietnam War. They didn't stop Sudan, Genocide, or Congo, and definitely they haven't stopped the current one. So, anyway. So back to for-profit and stewardship versus downstream. For-profit versus lording it up for profit versus stewarding downstream. So let's come back to I jumped out a little too far at that time. Okay, so pre-colonization, we worked 3 to 4 hours per day. All resources, food, medicine, housing were distributed according to need through Ahupua'a system. Okay, we did that one. In the Hawaiian story of the flying kalo, the one elite or leader on Moku'o Keawe who began to hoard wealth was chastised by Kalo itself, and all other Ahupua'a districts came together to pressure him to resume collective redistribution, also known as ho'oponopono, which means to make right, right? So this is in the story of the flying Kalo. I tell this story frequently on various YouTube and Twitch streams because it's important. It's one of actually many stories that is a kind of a fossilized ideology of the lived experiences and civilization of centuries upon centuries and millions upon millions of Kanaka Maoli humans, right, that have lived and told this story in various ways in various islands. There's a different folksonomy, because a lot of these were just orally passed down through the ages. It's a little bit different depending on who exactly you recall it from. There was a writing system in the Pacific, but it usually used stone, and it was a lot of it was unfortunately lost due to colonialism. So, but the story is very common, and it's well known. And the simplistic version is a flying kalo is one of basically there's a leader, right? Again, he is supposed to be he's supposed to be stewarding, supposed to be redistributing the resources according to need, right? Or ensuring that the resources are properly redistributed up and down the Ahupua'a system, right? Because if you have fish, if people who live near the kai, the ocean, or the moana is the word for ocean, right? But the kai is the salt water. If you live near the ocean, you catch fish, but that maybe there's less protein sources in the middle or upper area. There is pua'a, there's pig, but if fish is a particular kind of food, maybe people would also like to have that in the middle and upper regions. If people near the ocean are hoarding the fish, or they're not properly distributing it, right? That's part of the elite's job, is to make sure that all of these, everybody's getting what they need, right? So the fish from the coast needs to go to the midland and the upper area. The kalo from the middle, the middle terrace lo'i, the kalo plant, which produces lau, which is it's kind of like a spinach food. It's very highly nutritious, and then there's also the corms can be pounded and made into poi, and also made into taro chips and other things like that. So the staple kalo plant foods needs to be redistributed downstream and also up to the mountain area. And as we said, so the people who are specialists in house building, some people might specialize in the techniques and the maintenance. They have skills, right? They are kahuna is sometimes used to sell hamburgers in American culturally appropriate restaurants in things called the Big Kahuna Burger. But a kahuna is a specialist, somebody who's an expert at a particular field, right? So you could be like a kahuna, you might be an expert in house building. You might be an expert in rock wall building, which is important for terracing to have the advanced Ahupua'a biotechnology that allows you to feed 1 million people in a tiny region for over 1,000 years without damaging the land. The Europeans have never figured out how to do that, by the way, and neither have the Americans. To maintain the land in perpetuity, or for basically indefinitely, feeding large numbers of people, putting in less work. So the Hawaiians put in less work, less than half the workday of the American or the European or the Greek or the Roman, by the way, all of them. So part of this is actually, that's actually a lot of technology. Native Americans also put in less work than the average European or American or Roman or Greek or many Western countries. Without, I'm not saying that you don't use the benefit of new tools, but Eurocentric identification of all quote unquote advanced technology and all advanced lifeways as altering the environment more and having larger metal and gears and what is deemed advanced technology is not necessarily right mean that that warps the Western perception of what counts as technology, what counts as civilization, what counts as civilized, right? Like having a 21 gun salute and having a Christian Bible, that is what made you quote unquote civilized, right? And then Voltaire pointed out, these are the people that are also spreading syphilis by having mass child abuse. The priests, the bishops, and the lords and ladies and the business people of Europe mass murdering people, sexually abusing people, getting thousands upon thousands of people killed in wars of vanity and selfish conquest and wealth accumulation. This is the same thing. This is an unjust European leader. There's a movie, Chief of War, right? They just came out on Apple TV. I'll talk about that later a bit more. But that's just an example of like, just because you have a good system, if you fail to, and there's times in the history of the Pacific as a whole, the Maori people, our neighbors to the south in what's called New Zealand by the colonizers, and then Hawaii. There are periods and people and particular islands that had unjust leaders. Usually a man, older man with power and wealth, who's hoarding it, gathering. This is who Tamura Morrison plays in Chief of War. A leader who is seeks bloodlust, like he attacks children, he attacks innocent people, he attacks the maka'ainana, he attacks the farmer. Jason Momoa's character in it, there's a pointed scene where he's like, we don't attack the civilians, we don't attack innocent people, we don't attack farmers. He's like, what is that guy throwing? He's not throwing a spear. That's just a digging stick, right? And then definitely doesn't attack children. But then there are elite that will attack everyone, and they sacrifice everyone for their bloodlust, right? And if you don't stop that, like, that's why you have to have a good system of ho'oponopono, of justice, because if you don't restore a man who has accumulated power, who is getting his young men, they're all practicing, all they do is practice war. And you get him, an unjust leader who is older man with power accumulated, and then getting younger men, right, to train only for war, for his personal aggrandizement, right? If it gets out of, he can expand power, he can bring more people, more other villages, young men into his pool, kill all of their people, right? Increase his holdings, right? That's just the West. That's the United States, right? That's what it exhales imperial fire, blowing up, impoverishing South America, and it sucks all these young Hispanics into pilot drones to go blow up the Middle East. Sucks in young refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, right? Turns them into Marines that they pull triggers and shoot people in Afghanistan. They bring in more people and they send them. That's an imperial capitalist unjust process, planet scale. That's a planet scale lack of pono. Because you have a chief of war. The chief of war, his name is currently Donald Trump, or it's Victoria Nuland, Tony Blinken. There's a lot of chiefs of war. There's a lot of they're Lockheed Martin executives, right? They're also Blackstone executives. They all benefit from a planetary imperial capitalist, infinite war-based, war abroad, austerity at home, and extraction of wealth at the top. But that's why you need the West doesn't have any. They have very advanced systems to maintain not pono chiefs at the top that I just talked about, right? Because the not pono chiefs have been in power for 2,200 years at least in the collective West that traces its heritage to Rome and Greece, which it does. It's exactly where it comes from. And they have never stopped. They have advanced psychological weapons, the dollar reserve currency and previous reserve currencies, and weaponization of money. They have all of that history to go back to. That's why you read the classics so you can learn how your unjust, not pono leaders and how they're advanced. I call it cancer of the soul, right? Greek and Roman and British and French, all of those colonizers control people, dividing and conquering, right? Weaponizing religion as an opiate of the masses, right? Liberal academia worship post-World War II as a new opiate of college-educated masses, right? And following Metro Maddow and CNN into every war and calling it for human rights, right? That's another, right? The church also pioneered that to an extent, weaponizing alms and piety and people who wish to do good, right? And now we're all going to fight a crusade, right? So that the liberal imperial unjust not pono chief has a direct heritage through the Catholic and other Christian churches, and then there's the more conservative, which just comes through we all fight for the greatness of Great Britannia. We don't care about human rights. We don't care about alms. We don't care about the 7 deadly sins or the 10 commandments. We fight for that's more the mask off conservative, that we will fight the evil communist party. And that's the Winston Churchill. I don't apologize for the massacre of Native Americans. I don't apologize for 1 billion enslaved Africans. I don't apologize for what has happened to Palestine. I, Winston Churchill, a greater, mightier race conquered and dominated. And he was an unjust elite who accumulated vast wealth and power for himself and his elite. Never addressed friends, and they all had advanced systems of control. So when you have no system of right, you have to have a right society. You have to have a just society to do justice restoration, restorative justice. The problem is the West is 2,000 plus years of complete injustice at the highest scale. So you can't even try to do that. It's a nightmare, right? That's why you're living in a nightmare. We're all living in one. Which the BRIC is the alternate, the Silk Road and the global majority is starting to make headway on that, but it's going to be a process. It's going to be a process. You know what I'm saying? The process of restoring a 2,000-year planet-scaling human soul cancer has never been chemotherapied before. The Chinese are trying, you know. Brazil is replacing Visa and MasterCard with a non-Western denominated payment completion system that is actually more efficient, more accurate, and doesn't stop you from buying your Otome games or your LGBTQ plus itch and Steam software and mangas. So we're gonna see how that goes. BRICS Pay is leading the way. Also, I see the unjust elite, the chiefs of war of the West have a hard time getting a hold of the modern shark tooth swords. They're also called rare earth minerals. You can't really make any hypersonics or radars for your F-35s if you don't have those. But that's because the Chinese, they have a very advanced method of, they have the most advanced method of restorative justice. It's called Go. You know, it's called Communist Party of China, 30-year plus 100-year plans. And 3,500-year civilization states have very advanced ways of dealing, and they also do revolution frequently, of dealing with these unjust leaders. Nobody else can deal with them at that scale. But anyway, shout out to the global majority. BRICS will defeat the collective unjust West and the capitalist world. In the Hawaiian story of the Flying Kalo, the one elite leader, Moko Okeawe, who began to hoard wealth, was chastised by Kalo itself, and all the other Ahupua'a came together to pressure him to resume collective redistribution. So, anyway, but long story short, so this story is about a leader who actually chases Kalo. Kalo is the elder brother of the Hawaiians, right? And that is already a disrespect. That's like a great disrespect, right? He demands that he wants to eat these kalo that are particularly big and particularly tasty for himself, but he wants it for himself, right? And the kalo, but he is not properly feeding all of his people. This Ali, he's supposed to be stewarding, but he's being a CEO. You know, he's supposed to be a native Hawaiian, but he's trying to be like a Greek or a Roman or an American. Right? He's trying to pursue his own quote unquote rational self-interest. They're not very rational. They're selfish, not rational, right? And what his interest is actually, is if you accumulate enough wealth and you accumulate enough of this, right, you could become a Spartan, right? In order for the Spartans to have that size of army, they needed the slaves that are eating lower quality food, being killed and whipped and massacred. This is what the Dutch did to the indigenous people of Taiwan, by the way. Shout out to the collapse of the DPP. Anyways, if you want to have a large army, you need farmers. You need the maka'inana. You need the people that work the land to provide the food and all the basic necessities. They're going to be treated worse because you need to feed your soldiers. All they're going to do, right, is focus on fighting, and they're going to be brainwashed, right? Today we have a CNN, MSNBC. We just have Western culture, right, as a whole. We have G.I. Joe, Hollywood, Ayn Rand, motion pictures preservation of the screen Motion Picture Association for the Preservation of American Values, written by the anti-communist herself, Ayn Rand, who wrote how to get people by showing strong white men with the guns, right? By showing all of these G.I. Joe movies, right? How to get people to sign up to kill all the communists. The red Indian is the same as the red Chinese communist, the red Vietnamese communist, the red Asian, right? Those are the systems of brainwashing that also they happened in the past, not as advanced as modern billionaire philanthropist arms dealer playboy movies like The Avengers, right? They got millions of young people to sign up for the U.S. military, right? There's also just starving everyone, right? And saying the only way I will give you food and housing is if you sign up, you get a GI Bill, you get a roof over your head, you get guaranteed college, right? You get all of these benefits, right? Or you can just be poor and highlight receipts at Walmart in America, right? Or you fight for me, the unjust elite. But my point is that, like, so to have an unjust chief of war who is now crushing and taking other feudal lords' titles and entitled lands, and thereby slaves or serfs or whatever, people that are actually working to produce labor value to feed the growing army, right? Right. You need to have a suppressed agricultural and core working class, right? That is actually producing the material needs of the society, right? Which all Western countries have always had. There's always only been slave serfs, temporarily embarrassed millionaires. They're just called broke workers today. There's always an essential class. Today it's illegal immigrants, black, brown, prison slaves, the global south, right? Kenyan slaves to work in grok, right? Children starving and dying in the Congo to get all the materials for your phone and all your electronics. The West, you always need that. I mean, on a global scale. And then internally, you also have oppression. The people that work in the fields, that they're having a hard time working in the fields because of backward policies by the Trump administration that are actually self-defeating, because all the undocumented immigrants are not able to even harvest the tomatoes or the kale or pack the meat or do basic services. And so there's a collapse of U.S. GDP by like 0.5% just from the immigration policies, because the U.S. can't get its enslaved, it's today's modern enslaved populations to do its work, right? Now, in the Spartan time, they didn't have advanced methods of brainwashing too, right? You're a slave, and if you don't, right? If you don't tend to my olives, you Afro-Asiatic, black or Asian person, if you Persian slave, if you don't tend to my Hellenic Greek olives, I will kill you, period. African slave, if you don't tend to my Greek wheat, I will cut your hand off, right? Or the Dutch, you African slave that I have put on Turtle Island, if you don't tend to my sugarcane, I will cut your foot off. I will cut your hand off. If you take anything back for yourself, I will cut your hand off. If you try to run, I'll cut your foot off. Right? That's the Western system, right? It's just in general. If you don't have that class of people that is producing and have to give up, right? In the European feudal barbaric times, they just called it a fealty. But that was to feed the knight class, which is who? Those are the young, brainwashed men. Or also you have to give your sons up. Give your young, brainwashed men to die for the wealth and the power and the venalities and the prestige and the bloodlust and just the tabletop RPG gaming that they call Western imperial brutal conquest, right? It's just for fun. Today you can tell, right? Everyone is going to play the tabletop RPG, right, in DC when they're all ordering pizzas, right, in K Street, right? That's how you can. There's a whole thing you can survey, but that's the chief of war, right? It's just like killing 1 million people in a proxy war in Ukraine, killing 2 million people in Korea, and we just all hang out and we figure out how many B-2 bombers can we use to blow up Three Gorges Dam or shoot into Afghanistan today, right? When we start a war for our own personal pleasure and enjoyment of watching people die, I mean, even women can do this too. We know this because Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland, right? The Project for New American Century, Center for New American Security, neocons. They're women, but they really love getting 1 million people killed plus, right? Hillary Clinton laughed when millions of people suffered and died and they were bombed into the Stone Age with U.S. and NATO. And Hillary Clinton said about Gaddafi, who was starting the African Monetary Fund, building housing, healthcare, gave away free housing to young couples, had universal healthcare, universal education, using the wealth of their land. And Hillary Clinton said, we saw, he died, quoting Caesar. So we know that it's possible. You don't have to be a man, right? There are some women that can become unjust Ali as well, like Hillary Clinton, and of course Victoria Nuland, who just she never saw. She never saw a country with resources and young men beneath it that she didn't want to turn into a absolute catastrophe and get millions of people killed, which is what has happened in the Ukraine war. When she said, fuck the EU, and hand selected the future economic advisor and the future fascist ultra-nationalist leader, that would take the young people, brainwash them using U.S. Tools and U.S. funding and billions and U.S. weapons into a fascist army that would execute tens of thousands of people based upon their ethnicity and the language they spoke in the Donbass region, which is what Ukraine is about, in case you live in the West and you don't have any idea what the hell is going on there, which almost nobody does. Anyway, but the point is that the story of the Kalo is a story about that. It's a story about if you have an Ali who is taking the working class people that produce food, is hoarding it for himself, not just to eat himself and to grow to 500 pounds, but it's symbolically he's taking their food so that he can use it for his own resources, which is what large quantities of misled men who are going to fight wars of conquest, unjust wars, not defensive wars, unjust wars of conquest, like the Romans fought against the Kendake in Africa and lost to the African political and the African women presidents / generals who came to the front and stopped the Romans from entering the areas that are called Ethiopia today, right? Like the Vietnamese lesbian / sisters who founded that entire civilization state that is Vietnam, of 54 ethnic regions that came together to stop an invader thousands of years ago from the north. Not recently. Not recently. They're doing much better. But over 1,000 years ago, there was an unjust invader, and they came together to defend. It's also important that it was women in both Vietnam and a lot of in Africa's case. There were actually women who led the defensive armies against the unjust incursions to extract territory, young men, slaves, wealth, entitlements. So my point is that these kinds of things have happened over in history, right? Not all warriors are necessarily unjust. But I mean, as Kwame, I think it was Thomas Sankara that said, a soldier with no education is just a criminal, right? And then if you have a very powerful, wealthy criminal above him, you can take a lot of young men and make a really big war criminal army, right? It's called the West, right? It's called the United States. It's called NATO, right? You gotta because a young person who is just young, people like young guys, they got a lot of testosterone. They want to go do something glorious. They just. What would happen if Alexander and a whole bunch of young guys just ran out and just started killing people? Right? We're gonna bring civilization to what is today Syria, Iran. We're gonna try to get to China, right? That these kinds of things can't happen, right? Or the Romans just had a very, very systematized method of bringing in the young people, training them, fighting for the increased wealth, title, and property and power of the Caesars and the oligarchy behind them, right? So you have different kinds of systems. Those are the United States today, Britain in the 300 years ago, 200 years ago, and Rome. The real difference is the sophistication and the scale upon which of the systems of the hoarding of the resources of the productive working class to power the armies for internal suppression, whether those are knights beating up on serfs who don't want to give up their resources for the conquest of the unjust kings, or the landlords who beat up on the workers for the wealth that will fund armies and fund the domestic police forces that will break their legs when they ask for raises at their jobs, or break their legs and beat them out of their houses when they get evicted for not having $1,800 of rent to pay for a tiny one bedroom next to the meth lab above the highway in Los Angeles, which is untenable, unfeasible, immoral, and de rigueur de facto the West. That's just how it is, right? So the oh my God, I feel like I'm just scraping by being a regular working person in the West. That is by design, because you need that in order to fund this entire unjust system. And so anyway, so in one sense, the story of the flying collar is a story about capitalism. It's a story about what might happen if the communists, socialists, in a Marxian Western dialectical materialist sense, if our collective communistic system of distribution changes, we're going to become like this, right? Where this Ali on the island who decided to hoard wealth, this was unjust. And so, but because the Hawaiians didn't live for 2,200 years in perpetual injustice, while their leaders who had mastered brainwashing called injustice justice, and then Orwell wrote about how there could be doublespeak. Actually, Orwell's 1984 itself was imperial CIA MI6 propaganda to suggest that in this actually totalitarian Western capitalist world, which is premised upon mass brainwashing and mass violence, what if we became an unjust place where people had doublespeak and there was mass propaganda, repeating lies 1,000 times, right? That itself, right, it projected that into the Soviet Union, a place that was trying to undo the capitalist and the global colonial structure, right? That itself was the propaganda that, by projecting outwards what exactly you're doing, right? By going, oh my God, there's so many human rights violations in the Xinjiang against Muslims, right? Just by projecting it outward, people go, oh my God, it would be so terrible if our country ever violated a Muslim's human rights, right? The propaganda is about brainwashing the citizen, going, oh yes, how terrible it would be if our country ever harmed a single Muslim, right? Then it suggests to you that it isn't happening, when it absolutely is. It always has been. Way before October 7th. Obviously, Iraq, Afghanistan. Do we have to do this, right? But by constantly talking about what other people are, the problems other people are having, by projecting and lying about the problems that China or someone else. Obviously, today it's China, because the West is going to absolutely totally lose to a more advanced civilization than them. With 1.4 billion people, that's more than they've ever had in their entire history. It's all of the collective West put together, and it's not even close. And the Chinese and the Hawaiian system is actually closely related. The word hui means collectively working together with our bosses or landlords in Hawaiian, and also means the same thing in Chinese, and also Vietnamese, and also in Maori. So that Asia Pacific cultural and economic, and systemic, and political lifeways similarities is going to really be beneficial in drawing us closer together and further away from these unjust ali'i run system that comes from the Occident of Asia. Actually, in Voltaire's time, there was no such thing as Europe. It didn't exist in the 1750s. There's no such thing as this concept of this continent Europe. That was a construction for planetary labor division, for the modern Spartan slavification of 90% of the earth. That's what that was for. It was not a geological landmass. Right? Voltaire said, our continent, for which we are a part of, which includes Persia, which includes then Siam, which includes Russia, which includes China. None of these places have experienced mass, endemic, just ubiquitous syphilis, venereal disease, right? Chlamydia. Right? Why are they not experiencing this mass epidemic? Maybe because they're not constantly committing mass sexual violation, especially to children, right? Unlike the Jesuit priests, the Catholic Church, Louis XIV, and all of the lords and ladies that are constantly abusing children, right? Now, obviously today we know the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, and American business leaders, and all the politicians that have been on all the Epstein planes they're all they do is it's a system of mass child abuse and mass child sexual exploitation. That's what the West, you have to be able to. It's almost like practice to become a Western leader is to violate innocent people like children, right? So Gaza is just revealing 2,200 years of Western history to the world in real time, right? The uncaring violation of children. That's actually one of the things that symbolizes, right, in Chief of War, in the Apple TV show starring Jason Momoa, co-written by Jason Momoa and Tamara Morrison. He also plays Boba Fett. He's also a Maori person. He's also Aquaman's dad in Aquaman. Jason Momoa, but the unjust chief harms children, kills them. Right? It's very American. It's very British. It's very Keir Starmer. It's very EU. That's how you become a great leader. Is you have to be capable. Hillary Clinton, willingly, joyfully, gleefully defended known child rapists. That's how she got her bona fides to become a great Western leader, is the ability to mass harm with a smile, right? The most innocent amongst the people. That's how you become, because it's a system that you have to be able to stomach the mass starvation. Madeleine Albright, 500,000 innocent children and disabled and elderly people in the Iraq, in the sanctions on Iraq, right? That more people were starved with the wave of a hand under a Democrat administration in the 90s. Then even now have died under the current horrible, heinous, live streamed Holocaust that we all have to watch. And she just said, well, that's what we need to do to bring freedom and democracy, right? So, but the ability to double speak, right, and lie and project like you're breathing, right? That is actually like a warped skill. That's part of the soul poison in every Westoid heart. Right, you have to be able to do that because that's part of the culture. But people don't even realize how much you lie until you go and see you have to go see like a Ghanaian therapist. It's like, it's not normal to be constantly lying and asking people how they're doing, but you don't actually want to hear about it and like making up stories, right? That is actually endemic to Western culture. The perpetual small talk lying, big lying, white lying, all these kinds of lying, and like not lying for good reason. Like just constant perpetual lying for your superiors that are committing atrocities, lying for your bosses, lying to yourself about how good a person you're, lying to everyone, right? Lying to your children about what a just and sharing world you live in. It's not, right? Lying to yourself about if we just win this election, it's going to change. It's not. It's a plutocracy. It's not a democracy, right? You're lying, but constantly lying. There's probably one day there's going to be like a Chinese or a Vietnamese study on the Western brain. You do like a bunch of MRI scans on compared to like a culture that isn't perpetually having to rewrite entire histories of who they are and who at all times, and just constantly making up and just grabbing at half truths and facts and other methods of other people who have. Western history is the history of people that have lied to kill millions, right? And then taking those lessons of how to kill and crush millions of people for your selfish benefit or just survive the hell that is the West, right? Using lies, right? There's gonna be, there's gonna be a interesting neural expose on the Caucasoid brain one day. Anyway, so I'm like way off my topic. Let's move on. Emma Kaleleo Nalani fought for the world's first universal healthcare system in 1859 in Hawaii. No Western country would attempt socialized medicine for a century. The U.S. decimated our free healthcare for selfish profit. Today, U.S. workers are well stripped for private healthcare. Just when it comes to health. Prior to the U.S. coup, Hawaii had the world's highest literacy rate, 98%. Universal healthcare, electric lights before the White House, mass affordable transit, industrialization, virtually no homelessness, full racial equality, and post this coup, all these statistics reversed. I feel like this is always important to bring up. This is also part of how like the it's more evidence of what I'm talking about, right? Which is the Ahupua'a system was a system of no wealth hoarding, people working less in total to provide all the needs, because when the resources are properly distributed, they're not being hoarded for needless war, for private capitalist accumulation, and for wars of conquest and imperial plunder and for bloodlust. Roughly those kind of translate to Western language into like fascism. It's just like this bloodlust, the capitalism, the hoarding, right, and the need for the territory. Colonialism, imperialism, and just acquiring more territory. Like running society for personal risk board, just megalomaniacal games to benefit a tiny minority of people who like playing these games, right? This is like the DC crowd, right? The Wall Street crowd is more the capital accumulation crowd, and then the fascists is just the entire right wing, and which includes a lot of the liberal class that is a fascist that bleeds when you scratch it. It's called liberals. It's really across the board that really exists, and so when because the resources were properly distributed in this time, right? When Hawaii gained, they learned other human technologies like the technologies of vaccination, which, by the way, we were doing across the board once we got access to them. We're not anti-human scientific people. So when we encountered other technologies like trains, right, then we implemented it. When we call it in ways that didn't destroy the environment, by the way. Just as one example of that, when we implemented the system of transportation, right, we prioritized public affordable transportation that also minimally damaged the environment. We did have some trolleys, right, but when we needed electricity, right, we had renewable hydropowered turbines that also used the wealth of the water right, because the water could feed a community, but it could also power lights, right? And so that was something that we implemented before the United States capital had electricity. Hawaii already had electricity. So I think people like talk about, this is just a small little country. Hawaii was ahead of Europe and the United States in literacy. Hawaii was ahead of the U.S. and Europe in mass education. The Europeans would never, the Americans and Europeans, I would argue, have never achieved collective education, because if the Western people were properly educated, they wouldn't be capitalists anymore, because that is a system that is self-destructive and is fundamentally unjust, and it only can function if people are severely brainwashed and therefore not educated, right? I would argue if you are brainwashed and controlled by an unjust ruling class, you are not educated. So therefore, all Western countries don't really have education systems, and do not have education populations by and large. And the Europeans understood that. That's why they were afraid of Hawaii. This is why the West was afraid of the Soviet Union. This is why the West is afraid of China. They have a super educated population, because that's just normal human civilization. Is you want everyone to be educated, right? Educated like food, right? Speaking of the hana, the work of the hands that is distributed, right, under the Ahupua'a system, right, or the Hawaiian system of civilization. If the work of the hands produces food, it produces housing, like what we talk about with Blackstone, what they're hoarding, and it also produces education. It requires people to help educate the future generations, or give the kula, the school, right, to transmit the ike, the knowledge, to new generations of people, right? It's part of the social reproduction. There's a lot of study now going into the costs of societal reproduction. I think on Richard Wolff's the Western Marxist economists page, I think his wife or his partner, Dr. Harriet Fraud, has a whole video just about like the costs to raise, to child rear, to for 9 months gestate a small replication of yourself called a human baby. That has a lot of labor. It's a lot of energy. It's a risk to your life and your health. It's Braxton Hicks. It's 10 centimeter dilations that could be extremely painful, amongst various other, your inability to move, and then you have a 24-hour care for years with this small being that is on you and screaming, and you don't get a lot of sleep. That's a lot of work, and to not only give birth to a child, to raise a child from 0 to 5 years, and then to educate that child, that is a lot of work and a lot of labor to reproduce that society, right? And to produce that educated person, right? But if you have a socialist country, right? If you have a civilization that is Pono, that is living the Ahupua'a system of the 1800s, I would say that's what basically we had, where the resources are communal, are collectively controlled and given to all, and perpetuated into the future for generations, seven generations. It's really just indefinitely, right? That's the goal, is to think long term. If you're properly doing that, you need to be educating all the population to their maximum ability, not hoarding education for your aristocracy and for your millionaire and billionaire class, which is what the West does, by the way. Which is what they do. That's why most Americans believe they live in a democracy, when actually the Ivy League schools have done studies like Gillens and Page's shows that there's there's like 3% or less a margin of error impact that the masses, the population has upon their government's policies, right? So if they had an education in the West, they would know that, but most Westerners don't have any clue about that. That is actually a symptom of their lack of education and their mass enforced ignorance. That's just through school. There's many other ways to make ignorant people. You can make them watch Western TV shows or movies or news channels or anything else, or read Western books like the New York Times bestsellers that are all about how they're gonna fight fentanyl by blowing up China, starring Jack Ryan, right? Watch it now. You know, that was the Captain America failed New World, right? About how America is gonna defeat communism, and there's that movie that's literally a CIA written script about how Nicole Kidman is a CIA agent that's gonna stop Chinese and Mexicans from drugging all Americans with fentanyl. Like they're like literally that's what's destroying America is. Is not the narco traffickers of the world that were the British and the French opium warriors, and then it was the United States, but it's these foreign invaders. So anyway, if you exist in Western culture, you are perpetually being diseducated, as I constantly make the point in this stream and on these channels. But that is the system, right? The system is to never have truly educated people in your country or anywhere on the earth, right? As as Bill Casey, the head of the director of the CIA, said in the 1980s, we will know when the disinformation, that should be read, the diseducation, the anti-education, the adverse to knowledge, right? This head of the CIA said, we will know when the disinformation campaign of the American people is complete, when everything the American public believes is false. So it doesn't even matter if you didn't have a defunded Department of Education. The actual ruling class of the United States has a Department of Diseducation where it counts. And as long as you have that, that's why the West will always have serious problems. Now, one of these is obviously the attempt to censor the entire internet using protection of children and the Torment Nexus, Torment Nexus NVIDIA stock portfolio pontificators, bullshit machines. They're called AI, right? And the UK government is just trying to do 1984 to itself by trying to control the entire internet, making everybody jump through every hoop they possibly can to log into their Discord or YouTube or and people which is again that's the doublespeak, right? Wouldn't it be terrible if we lived in a Orwellian world, like in 1984? By the way, you have committed a thought crime for trying to stop the Holocaust. Now you're going to prison, and this British police officer, will beat your skull in, right? So, anyways, so Hawaii was ahead in literacy because of the redistribution of high quality education and the lack of a elite-based anti-education system called the CIA, called news, called the capitalist owned and operated news publishing. All information is controlled and operated by capitalists. There was a small amount of public education. I think PBS and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting just got destroyed. That's really great. That's going to help out. Not that you need PBS. NPR, PBS are probably going to go underwater. But it's like, it's not that. Not that they were handing out communist pamphlets from PBS, but in order to have an educated population, right, you need to have a system and leadership that cares about your education. The capitalists that own, right, Peter Thiel, the Fortune 500, Bill Gates, these people don't care about your education, right? They care about their profit. The more educate. There's actually it was described in the 80s as it's going to be a big problem if large quantities of our population become educated because they may discover the problems with the capitalist system. This was actually under Reagan's administration. It was known this was going to be an extreme problem as we started having more people sign up for college. There's an increasing number of people getting college educated. And so that's why they increased that, massively inflate the student debt in order to put a noose and a leash around everybody's neck. Right? And then so that is the fealty that you owe to your Lord. It doesn't matter how big your brain becomes. Not that it's going to become particularly big if you go to Western college, which is also complicit in GNLCID, but it also is filled with liberal brainwashing as well. Just as one example, Michael Hudson, who defected to a socialist civilization, said basically everything they teach in economics departments is science fiction. It's not applicable to reality, which is true. In economics, when it comes to history, this massive corruption and all of even the liberal Western higher education systems. Not that the right wing just says nobody's going to ever have an education. Let's just go back to you being illiterate slaves. Not that it's better, but I mean, like, you shouldn't have neither of those is particularly good. And that's why they had people starting to average tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt in order to perpetually change you to a corporate mortgage, which you will require fealty to capitalism, to the Walmart you work for, to the Apple that you're a lawyer for, to the as a tech lead and IT person working on Linux machines for Hewlett Packard or whatever you're doing with your college education. You will be chained as a Gen X. Most of Gen X's is who they are. And the handful of millennials that still have some kind of slight deal with the devil of imperial capitalism led by the United States, they are silenced, right? These are people that are just putting their fingers in the ears, going to brunch when people are reading off the names of people who were unalived in the Levant, right? But they have this college debt, but now they have their entire social friend network, right? And their gainful employment that allows them to spend $200 on a fucking Doom box set, right? Which is, I mean, I'm glad if a Gen Xer can give us $100 of Patreon per month to help finish Neofeud. I don't have a 22 floppy disk box set for you right now, but some people have said I will pay $1,000. Some of these people with mass discretionary spending, based upon their indentured neo-feudal corporate fealty for their night ship, as one of the as one of the warriors, as one of the knights doing battle for their neo-feudal lord masters in court, or in the electronic warfare across the world trying to disrupt Iran and Russia's and China's Beidou satellite network. I don't think you're going to be very successful, but if you make $100,000 trying to disrupt the advanced cyber war divisions of BRICS, and you want to put some money into Neofeud too, I mean, I won't say no, but you're going to fail at that. You should maybe think about trying to do something else, but there's not much gainful employment that doesn't involve human rights violations in the West, unfortunately. Wow, I'm like way off the topic today. Anyways, okay, let's go back to the thread though. Okay, so Project ESQ. So okay, yeah. One other thing is, if you want to learn more about the Ahupua'a system specifically, I know I didn't talk a lot about it. I talked some about it, but you want to learn more about it. This is a video called "How Hawaiian Rebel." Oh, not this is just an ad, but how Hawaiian rebels are rebuilding an ancient food paradise. And this goes into a lot of the nitty gritty about what that entails. Permaculture instructor Andrew Millison visits this project. Actually, I know some of the people that work at this particular project. It's not happening in one place, but this is one of the big Hawaiian culture and food. It's really a food system environmental preservation system, a political system, and an economic system, all built into one, right? Actually, they talk about it more at length in this video. It just came out yesterday, so that's why it's a I'm glad that they're doing that, and they are doing a Kickstarter to fundraise for this as well, which is good, because we're gonna need all that we can get here, because statistically Hawaii actually has the highest housing prices, the worst inequality by a magnitude. It has the worst food, housing, gas, everything prices, the highest level of exploitation, the highest rate of police actual per capita police murder of non-white versus white individuals, and the highest mass incarceration, which Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians are the number one most per capita over incarcerated. It's about 4 times more likely. We're 4 times more likely to go to prison and mechanically separate Tyson chicken nuggets for the rest of our life in a 3,000 miles from our home incarceration facility, neo-slavery facility in Arizona. And so, we really need all the help that we can get with that. Anyways, okay, so this is the let me see if there's anything else I wanted to add before we wrap. Oh yeah, Chief of War. So I did Chief of War is let me see if I have it here. Yeah. So I'll just throw it up on. I'm not going to play the trailer. But Chief of War is a TV show. Chief of War is a Apple TV show that just dropped. This is a trailer for it, but it just came out apparently yesterday. It has 2 episodes out. So I have not watched all of the currently available 2 episodes. We watched the first one yesterday. But it's a show, so I can't really give it a full review. But I mean, it does look very promising. It does have a lot of Shogun characteristics. Shogun was another TV show, came out recently in the prestige television world. We didn't watch all of that, but that was it was also very very entertaining, certainly well written and acted and shot. And Chief of War seems to be in that similar sort of vein. And we just saw the first episode last night, so it is on my mind. And I feel like one thing that like they illustrate a lot of the points I've been trying to make in the last. I'm always trying to make these, but especially in the last week or so. The Ali that is played, Kahikili, played by Temura Morrison, who is a Maori person. He's from New Zealand, Aotearoa. But he is playing the chief of Maui, the high chief of Maui. And it kind of illustrates the point that I have been trying to make, right? Which is that is why you have that the myth of the flying kalo, right, is really a story. I would say. I mean, maybe some Hawaiians will disagree. Don't believe in what I'm saying. We're not a monolith, but the real story of the flying kalo is a story of methods to maintain the Ahupua'a system, methods to maintain collectivity, to maintain a just society, to maintain environmental sustainability, to minimize violence and needless violence and bloodshed and war, and to minimize the oppression and exploitation in the society, right? So the kalo fly away and they leave because the Ali is trying to hoard to build his personal power. And also the flying kalo, right, when they fly in the, let's see if I can get a picture of that. I know I kind of jumped all over the place in this stream. I apologize for that, but I did not get my full sleep last night. That's probably part of the problem. Let me see. Okay, look at that. I'm the first thing that shows up. I know Holly has a link. Holly, do you have a link to it? Sorry. It's not the most. It's not always the easiest thing. You have the link in the chat. Okay, let's see if I can. Okay. Okay. Yeah. In the story, the Kalo are being chased around by this hoarding, unjust elite, and they fly away. Right, using some versions they kind of flap their Kalo wings. They flap their leaves and fly like a seagull, and they fly out of the patch to the next one, right? And then they fly to the next one, and he keeps chasing them and chasing them and chasing them. Eventually, they come to Ka'u, and in the version of the story that I've heard, right, they not in that one, but in this versions that I actually worked on a 3D animation video for a practicum when I was in college in the university system in Hawaii, and when they land, the chief of Ka'u, who is a just chief, calls together other ali'i, so other districts, right, come together, and they confront the hoarding, right, the unjust wealth hoarding, and thereby power, and thereby potentially, right, unjust war making to increase his power and wealth chief, who is probably feeding his young men, right, this kalo that he's extracting unjustly from the makainana, the workers that are the working classes tending to the lolo'i, growing the food, farming, right. And so then so the other ali'i have to interrogate him and go, what are you trying to do? Why are you chasing people? Right? I mean, historically, right, there's situations where it's actually interesting. This actually happens in not Empire Glass, in Chief of War, right? This ali'i, played by Tamara Morrison, he is chasing Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa's character has left because, right, this Kahikili, he is making war unjustly, right? He has unalived children, right? You see that happens. He gets Jason Momoa's father killed. He makes war for personal reasons, for selfish reasons, to expand his holdings, right? It's actually the perfect illustration of what I was just talking about, right? It's actually in the first episode of. And so Jason Momoa leaves his district. He goes to Kauai. Right? He's from Maui, but he goes to Kauai. Why did he go to Kauai? To leave the district of the unjust leader, right? And actually, not just the warriors, right? In Hawaiian history, that's what I said. If all of the farmers who grow, again, the material, who maintain the material needs by raising the food, right, and building the housing, if they all leave, especially the food growers, if they all leave, it's like a general strike, right? It's a working class mass exodus. If they all leave that area, because again, there's no differentiation between the government, and the business, right? If they all leave that area, it amounts to a total general strike, a total withholding of labor. Nothing will grow in that ali'i, that unjust hoarding ali'i's region. If he tries to become a capitalist, in a 99% communist, another way to think about it in a Marxist sense, in a 100% communist society, if 1% of that society tries to become capitalist and hoard and then become a capitalist, fascistic, imperialistic, conquest-based, or all of the above, right? With one rich or handful of rich old men taking young men, taking an exploited farm, working classes food, feeding that army to go kill and crush and expand their territory. If that happens, right, then it's actually the responsibility. It's the responsibility, actually, of the masses of that district to leave. It was basically voting with your feet. It's pauhana. It's nui pauhana nui. It's a big time. We're not working anymore. Pau means done. Hana, work. We're not gonna work. All of us. It's like pauhana. My grammar's a little bit wrong, but pauhana loa. It's probably not exactly what you call it, but it is the very large end of work. Without the workers tending to those fields, right? Then the Li who seeks conquest and profit and power will not be able to feed his armies. His soldiers will begin to, right? I'm not going to farm. Farming is not a vibe, right? So what's happening to America right now? They don't have any essential workers to feed their massive global 800, 900 military-based imperial conquest, profit, and power-seeking system, right? What happens if you don't have your basic inputs, right? What if America had a general strike and nobody worked? What if all of the global farmers of the world that supply America with its rare earths, its food, its minerals, its extracted exorbitant privilege, dollar reserve currency, imperialism-based profit. What if that all said, right? That's the BRICS is kind of doing a planetary general strike against the United States and the collective capitalist Western white world as a whole. That's one way to see it, right? But if the elite decides, if the masses all do their responsibility to, like the Kalo, right, leave the territory, right? Like Jason Momoa in Chief of War, right? He says, I'm done. I'm going to Kauai. I'm not going to fight for you anymore, right? If the just soldiers, the just warriors, leave the unjust leader, they say, you're not defending Pono. You're not being aloha. You're not caring for the community. You're not ensuring proper redistribution of resources, right? You're being a poor Communist Party member of the Chinese Communist Party. You're being a capitalist. You're expelled. You're not properly. You are not upholding the Cuban Revolution and the redistribution of our resources that we have fought along with Castro and with blood and $130 billion plus worth of embargoes and sanctions. You, as a selfish, you're probably being paid by Marco Rubio to try to balkanize or start a Cuba Libre, right? You are being an unjust socialist Cuban right now. You're going to have to be removed from your position, right? Or what I'm trying to say was, like, if you have a society that recognizes that wealth hoarding is unjust, that recognizes that conquest for personal reasons is unjust, right? Then the people should all do their duty, right? To make right, which means you have to leave that person. You have to bring it to them. Obviously, you might want to talk to people first and be like, hey, a lot of things are done through conversation and community, the community and community care and community association is so important for. I mean, any society that has community. The West don't have any, but Hawaii, Pacific and Asian societies, they talk a lot. Sometimes people say too much. That's probably why I talk so much. But they talk to each other about all the problems that they have, and then you resolve things by discussing and say, hey, when you stole from me, I didn't really appreciate that, and then you make it right. I'm so sorry. You do ho'oponopono for person. But if you have somebody who is really a leader and he's got hundreds of or thousands of people under him that all want to say, well, we don't care about we don't, right? That's actually right. And then you have to leave that region. You have to take a bigger action, right? And say, oh my God, we're going to become a capitalists like these Westerners. No, like the Americans aren't there yet, but this is a deeply unjust place. This person is hoarding housing, he's hoarding food, he's hoarding medicine to himself for him and his army. They're mistreating the working farmers, the working class. We have to leave. And the soldiers, if you believe in Pono, if you believe in the Hawaiian values, if you believe in if you want to honor your ancestors that lived the just Pono way, you as a soldier have to leave this guy too. Right? And that actually, that I mean, I'm not saying that is exactly what this story is about, but when the story starts, Jason Momoa is living far away from his home. He's actually catching a shark using a ava, which is a sedative, right? So they use it to relax, but it's also the ava root. It can sedate sharks, and he's like hand fishing a shark in the ocean. A giant great white shark looks like, or tiger shark. They didn't have stripes. And he catches the shark, and they eat the shark. But it's like, thank you for giving your death will sustain much life, right? So he's like, he's hunting on this the island far from his home. He's basically farming, right? He was a warrior, but now he's farming on this other island because he doesn't want to fight for the unjust leader, right? That's actually an example of what I'm always talking about. Or what I am bringing up today, what I have brought up frequently, which is that the exodus or the strike, or the leaving the area, leaving the Ahupua'a of the the not just leader, and it could be called a general strike in the sense of none of the work upon the land of the would-be capitalist in a communist Kanaka Maoli Ahupua'a civilization, right, will put the pressure on the would-be capitalist, would-be fascist capitalist chief of unjust war maker, right, unjust conquest doer, to change his ways. Because if he doesn't change his ways, his soldiers are going to starve. He himself is going to run out of food, right? And so, but then that will so it's another way of thinking about it. It is a collectivist, communistic civilization through the withholding of labor, sanctioning the selfish hoarding of a would-be capitalistic, fascistic leader or small group, right, to kind of excise that tumor before the cancer metastasizes and then you become the West, right, where it's just everywhere, right? So it's like where the West sanctions countries that are trying to practice communism. Russia's one, not necessarily Russia's not communist, but China is under huge enemy number one. Cuba, heavily sanctioned, right? North Korea, heavily sanctioned. Any country that is trying, what do they do? What is their crime? What is the crime of North Korea and Cuba? What is their actual crime? Not having a for-profit system of where corporations and billionaires and millionaires can control and benefit them from the work of the masses, and they have a public health. North Korea has a public housing system. There's no rent. There's no rent. Speaking of housing, there is no rent. There is no Blackstone in North Korea because there is no rent at all, right? And that is their crime. So the West, that is the corrupt, unjust world sanctions the attempts to produce justice in the world, and they're called the most evil. Again, same tactic. Project everything you do. Call them the most evil, unjust, human rights violating people in the world. They're the ones that are trying to preserve human rights. And for the crime of trying to provide housing at no cost. When you start a family in North Korea, you are allotted a house based upon, if you're an electrician and your wife or partner is a nurse, you're given a job within a few 10 or 20 minutes drive or train to both of your jobs, and you have a school that's assigned to you. There's no mortgage. There's no rent. There are no mortgages. There are no rents. There's no housing markets at all. And then you are given the housing that you need by need, and then you're given the healthcare is free, food is extremely low cost, electricity is basically free, and higher education is free. Only discretionary spending costs money. And for that, they are sanctioned. North Korea and Cuba are starved to death, right? Under the planetary cancer of Western capitalist imperialist racist system. In Hawaii, but it's the opposite. If you have a collective civilization that's healed, and then somebody tries to hoard and then produce a housing market and produce, right, control of food and withholding food based upon how much the ruler needs to maintain his power and to increase his holdings, right? Then those people are sanctioned by the mass exodus of the workers. But anyways, you see how like that system. I mean, you can strike obviously under a capitalist system. You can strike to try to improve your situation a bit in that moment. Ideally, though, you would get rid of, right, instead of trying to build 2% cancer where there's 1% cancer with a strike. It's even better to just get rid of all of the cancer, right? And then after you're done cleansing yourself of the poison, of the garbage, of the evil. I mean, I don't know if you noticed this. It's committing multiple holocausts as we speak. It's evil. The system and the people that are committing these things, right? Get rid of all of that, and then you have to, right? The Chinese will say, America, you see, you have an oligarchy, you have a plutocracy, you run by landlords, you need revolution, right? They're very direct about that. What are you doing? I mean, you're never going to get any change. Your whole entire society is run by narco-trafficking, billionaire, military-industrial complex, child murdering, GNOCIDAL, horrible people. You're gonna have to do what we did in the 1940s. You're gonna need that. If you don't have that, you need total cleansing of your entire system. But anyway, long story short, but in Chief of War, you actually see it happening. You see him leave. You see other people have left. Who remains? Who remains under the unjust elite? Unfortunately, the people that remain there are not the best people, and they're all hunting him down because Jason Momoa's character is a great warrior. He's a great warrior. Like he demonstrates his fighting skills later on and defeats many would-be adversaries. But he leaves because he's trying to do the Pono thing, right? And then he gets chased around and he tries to get tricked, right, by the unjust elite to fight for him. Also, you see that the unjust elite doesn't care about the rules and the desecrates sacred spaces, hurts children, hurts innocent farmers, hurts civilians, hurts innocent people. Doesn't care about how many people his war kills. He fights the wars because he likes to fight wars. His people like to fight wars. They like to win and to crush others, right? That's the fascistic, young, toxic, masculine bloodlust, right? That's part of that. And when Jason's character encounters a farmer, they stop. They're fighting a war, and then these people are just farmers. Then they stop killing. When they encounter children, they don't continue. And then there are the other elite. Then there's other leaders that do, right? So anyway, that comes back to the Thomas Sankara. If you are a soldier with no education, you are just a criminal, right? Or if you're also with moral compass, you're also just a criminal. Or if you're led by horrible leaders, if your commanding officers above you has no moral compass, like the United States military, like NATO, like the British, French colonial military, like the Roman military, right? What are they doing that for? For the aggrandizement of oligarchs in Rome, right? If you are not a principled, just to be a warrior is not necessarily a problem, because sometimes places need defense, or sometimes people need People Liberation Armies to dig them out of massive typhoons and earthquakes, and that you need some people that's trained and highly organized in the emergencies to defend from natural disasters and stuff like that too. But if you are somebody who is trained in defense, and then you start using that for misusing your training and your abilities, right? Then that has to be addressed. If it's not addressed, it expands, and you can really see the differences. I think I only saw the first episode, so I can't speak to the whole show. But a lot of this stuff that I talk about Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture, I mean, I feel like you can see a lot of that, happening, even in just the first episode. There's a lot. Anyway, this is not a review of the. I was thinking about just doing a review of Chief of War. I don't have time for that, so. Let's wrap this up though, because it's almost 2. Okay. Anyways, so I think that's mostly what I wanted to say in my lack of sleep brain. But anyway, so if you have, so the Blackstone situation, which again, I mean, if executives are becoming unalived. It is because that's not really the best way, but that's part. The United Healthcare executive was unalived very clearly, for very clear reasons, right? Defend, deny, depose. That person, he's never been caught, by the way. Luigi Mangione is just somebody that NYPD picked up, or the United States picked up with no clear evidence. The whole court case is just a giant fiasco. It's about as legitimate as the U.S. It's about as legitimate as the U.S. little pet settler colonial project in West Asia, right? The whole thing is a giant hoax. I mean, NYPD is trained by the IDF, so But what we know is that there is huge inequality because of landlords, because of lording it up. Whether that's healthcare, right? A healthcare executive was unalived, and then the Blackstone executive has been unalived. And they're trying to make it seem in both cases, right? There's actually been at least 4 or 5 separate, and probably a lot more than that, capitalist individuals have personally lost their lives. There was in the same month of Brian Thompson, there was another shooting, and then there was another stabbing of an executive. And this is continued. They're just not covering it in the media. because the number of, basically they're like the modern supersonic guillotine is called a bullet. They're flying all over the place, and the elites don't want the masses to know that they're afraid, which they are. That's why Elon was wearing his human shield, his probably heavily abused, unloved child. The way that he's using it, like walking around, it's pretty dangerous, and especially when it's coming down the stairs and he like left his child behind. They're afraid of what could happen, right? But long story short, they are lording it up over profit. It's causing increased misery. It's a terrible way to manage housing. It's a terrible way to manage the hale / housing. It's a terrible way to manage the food, whether that's kalo or whether that's the Walmart food section or Safeway, right? And also the tomatoes. It's a terrible way to manage it's a terrible way to treat your farmers. That is the undocumented immigrants that pick the tomatoes, pack all the beef, and do all the core labor that feeds the people of the United States that's oppressed, horrible conditions as it has always been. But it's also a terrible way to use to treat. It's a terrible way to deal with healthcare, which is to hoard it and to basically deny it using quote unquote AI to deny 90% of people's legitimate claims, which is what United Healthcare did under Brian Thompson, and then he died. But I mean, that system is in existence. It's unjust. It has to be changed sooner or later. I don't know how exactly it will be changed. It's very difficult to get from a capitalist for-profit landlord system to an Ahupua'a. You can't really. This is where there's socialism with Chinese characteristics, and Ahupua'a is socialism with Hawaiian characteristics. The system, it's and like as the Chinese will tell you, as our elder civilizations of Yajo will tell us, you cannot replicate socialism with Chinese characteristics inside of a non-China location. It is. There's many of the characteristics that actually really matter, and the culture is part of the culture and history and what has produced the civilization up until that moment. All of that matters, right? And so the path exactly for the United States and a lot of the West is not clear. But what we know is that it's not going very well. And in land back and indigenous lifeways and can be learned from and studied, and people can benefit from that in try to apply some of these in their own lives. But anyway, long story short, I hope that this works out better, and I don't just want it all to collapse, but it looks like there's going to be a little bit more rough ride going down. But hope everybody does and survives as well as possible under those circumstances. If you'd like to help us, ko-fi.com/silverspook is a place that you can directly support us. You can also help us out at patreon.com/Neofeud. And we are definitely trying to increase our total amount of patronage from where we are at. We'd like to get it above the 500 level. So if any amount can help us out at the Silverspook. Silverspook is a anti-capitalist cooperative of Native Hawaiian led. We're basically just a household, but we also do our best to uphold the Ahupua'a system and grow as much food as possible on the land, and try to we distribute education freely. We appreciate any support we get, but we'll give as much of the education as we can freely. And also, of course, we try to use the land. These are some of the things we're growing is onions. This month, the onions are getting a lot bigger, and we have a sweet potato. And we also have, this is actually beans, which we have recently added to the roster of crops for our section of the Ahupua'a has recently added beans. And we also have cilantro and Thai and Italian basil. It was Thai and another kind of basil. I forget exactly what strain. And anyways, so if you want to help us out at the Silverspook Ahupua'a, you can directly support us at patreon.com/Neofeud. You can also grab Neofeud, which is an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist cyberpunk retro adventure game that is on sale for the next very short amount of time. Or is it? Did the sale just finish? Maybe it just finished. Wait, is it on sale? Yeah, it's still on sale. And 17 hours. And every sale of this game does help us at the Silver Spoon Cooperative. So consider getting it. And if you have a second to leave even a very short review, if you like Neofeud, consider leaving a review because that also helps us out here at the Silver Spoon Cooperative. You can also get a Neofeud on itch.io for Windows and for Mac and for Linux. Neofeud is also a retro cyberpunk adventure game that is you can get it without downloading Steam. You can get it DRM free. It's also an executable you can run anywhere you want when you get it on itch.io. And of course, you can also get other games like Decolonators, Indigistar, Pigeon with Gun, and Woman is a book by Holly, who is raised in right-wing Christian evangelical culture. And it helps and it critiques that culture from the perspective of Mary in the Bible. You can also follow at Silver Spoon Games at Mastodon.social, at Silver Spoon Games at Wandering.shop. And of course, you can follow on Blue Sky. We're all over the place. Look for Silver Spook. And you can also follow Holly at Allergic to Blue on Instagram and also on Facebook. If you want to learn more about the Ahupua'a, like the Hawaii specific stuff, I talk a little bit more about that on on Silver Spook Guy. I'm trying to talk a little bit more about that stuff, so you can follow at Silver Spook Guy. And of course, you can also follow on Instagram Silver Spook Hui, where we talk also about this on this. Yeah. Thank you to all of our Patreon patrons, massively. Oh my God, it's almost 2 shoots. Went a little too long. It's probably I went to bed at like 1 because I was working on Neofeud 2. And I cannot keep it's a little bit harder to keep the narration straight. Anyways, thank you to all of our Patreon patrons. Massively appreciate all of your support. Thanks very much for all of it. Without your support, it's hard to keep doing this work. So thanks for all of that. Anyways, until next time, keep your mirror shades polished, keep your Ahupua'a clean of hoarding, and